And there are lots of times in my life that I did not see myself the way God saw me. And therefore, I was hesitant to actually dance to the rhythm of the song that he had formed for me, the song of my life. And so I was resistant to it because I didn't see myself that way. But he did. And therefore I learned to trust in his view of me. Therefore, if he wanted me to do something or lead me in a direction, I learned to trust that he knows more about me than I do. And if I'm not in agreement with him, I'm the one who's going to miss out on that. So I started to step out and take some risks. Even though I was hesitant, I trusted him.
I want to ask you, Mike, what what you're seeing, what your perspective is as of what's going on. I just have been sensing a shift, and with the different benches and what Father's moving us into, and I just was wondering if you couldn't give me your thoughts on it.
What, in terms of the sort of what God is raising up in terms of authority or areas for that authority? What exactly do you mean by
Mm, I really don't know what I mean. It's just something that I'm sensing and feeling and
okay,
experiencing, in some of my calls, people that I've joined with
okay,
in corporate bench settings.
yeah,
And, um,
okay,
I just, I often come back to you constantly encouraging us to do everything with the Father.
yeah,
And at times I see the opposite happening
yeah.
and that not being established. And on a personal level, and then when it moves into the corporate,
Mm.
it doesn't seem to bear the fruit that I see.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get what you're saying. Uh, Basically, I think when revelation comes out, people jump on the revelation, even if they're not at the level of maturity to be able to operate in that revelation fully. So when benches came out years ago and governmental authority and heavenly authority and all those things, people were, oh yeah, we want to do that. We want to legislate and we want to make legislation and we want to use legislation. I think some of that was done with lack of understanding of governing in love. So people started to do government as they would have done under a spiritual warfare type dynamic. So it was very confrontational and looking to deal with the enemy and all those things. Because people's relationship with God was not at a level where they really knew his heart, they were operating out of their own hearts, doing the things that they had learned to do using the heavenly court system and all those things. And I heard people using the heavenly courts to punish people, and it was like, no, they're not using the heavenly courts. They just think they are, in that way. And when it came to the real sort of start to deconstruct a lot of religious ways of thinking about God and God being someone who's going to punish or dish out wrath or anger or all of those things, um, when that deconstruction took place, more people began to realize that if they're going to operate in sonship and in governmental authority, it's got to be out of God's heart. And therefore, it's got to be based in love, which I think is why we've got this great increase in awareness of the grace and the message of inclusion and God's love and all of those dynamics. So people who are beginning to move into that actually are probably moving away from what they see of the previous governmental way of doing things and are beginning to probably do things on their own, in a governmental way, out of the relationship they have with love. So some of the original benches and all those type of things, have disbanded or they don't work effectively because some of the people have discovered love and how to administrate in grace, and others are still trying to operate. So there's a sort of a bit of a contention over it and how it works. But I would expect to see, as more people move into love and more people begin to truly awaken to the true nature of God and how he wants us to govern in sonship, then we would use that corporal authority and the government of authority of benches from a heavenly perspective rather than an earthly one. And what I saw was often benches would still be operating in a top-down type of authority structure, which really doesn't work. It needs to be a foundational governmental structure which operates out of God's heart in love. And I think more maturity is needed. And the reason it didn't work as effectively as perhaps we'd hoped it was going to work is because people were operating out of their own heart, and God didn't really release the authority to fully operate in that, and therefore limited the damage people would have done. So ultimately, the more people mature, I think the more true government will form, and sonship will be a reflection of the Father's heart, in which we will be governing in love, administrating grace and mercy and love in that way, in an effective way, because we'll be doing it in alignment with the Father, rather than, oh, there's a problem, we need to fix it, we'll use our authority to fix it. And I think that's how it began to operate. And I had a number of groups that were doing governmental things, and there were some people in those groups who were still operating in a spiritual warfare type dynamic. And whenever we'd get together, okay, let's go and engage God for what he wants to do, and they'd come back with their own sort of subject that they wanted to deal with. And we need to deal with this trafficking, we need to deal with this deep state, we need to deal with all these things. And to be honest, those things are a reflection of where people are, because they don't know God and they don't know their identity in Christ. Therefore, administrating the release of awakening to love and engaging with God truly through their identity will deal with those things. We don't have to come against things. I think part of the problem in terms of government was thou shalt not, because that was the way people perceived God's government to be. Thou shalt not do this. It was law-based. And therefore people operated in the same way, using law to prohibit or come against things, rather than actually, most laws are not prohibitive. They're actually permissive. They give you the power to do something. And to do those things, you're going to do them in a different mindset and framework, in the sort of more confrontation, we're going to come against the enemy and we're going to deal with this and we're going to deal with that. And let's face it, it didn't work. It never worked under the spiritual warfare banner. It wasn't going to work under that banner either, because it wasn't a reflection of the true nature of God and how God does things. God does things in a positive way. He does things in a way of blessing and bringing people into an alignment with truth. So people come into alignment with his heart. He doesn't basically forbid and come out with laws, so as people's mindset changed towards that, then I think people will begin more and more to administrate and legislate God's heart, and that will be a positive. So to be honest, am I really bothered by what the enemy's trying to do? No, unless it tries to stop me doing what God wants me to do, and then I will look to deal with that. And as we come into a more restorative way of governing and administrating, then that conflict that we tried to get into, of stopping this and stopping that and coming out against this and changing that, I think will begin to change to reflect more of what God's about, and actually start positively governing and legislating out of the heart of God and not in confrontation or conflict. So, often when revelation gets released, immature people begin to use it. And that's true in history all the way through. And then as people mature, then they begin to be shaped in what they're doing differently. And I feel That is also true with the mystic movement and everything else. The more we know God, the more we know who we are, the more we operate from that perspective. And it becomes so much less focused on the enemy and more focused on God. And then if there is an issue with the enemy, or there's opposition, or there's things, then we become restorative in the way we deal with it. And we engage it in a restorative way. Let's actually see those things that are coming against us, which we might perceive as our enemies, become our friends, and then they can help us in administrating what God wants to do rather than opposing it. And I think that sense is not there fully yet, because there's still a lot of people who still use the old model. Well, we're going to kill dragons and we're going to destroy these things and do this and do that. And yeah, it didn't work. It won't work effectively, because actually you can't destroy an immortal spiritual being. They were created, and they're not going to suddenly disappear because we take a sword out and cut their heads off, because literally you can't. It was figurative of removing their authority. It was never a destructive thing. But people thought they were destroying these beings. Well, they weren't, because you cannot destroy something that God has made. And Jesus created those things by him, for him, through him, and they will have all been reconciled by the blood of the cross to be restored back to relationship with him, however long that will take. So there's quite a lot in that question you asked in terms of the sort of facets to it, and how we need to look at it. And the key is not to get disappointed. Don't get disappointed that, hey, we've not accomplished or fulfilled all the promise that we first saw in legislating or producing laws and all of those things. We will become more mature, and we will be more effective in it as we do it out of God's heart, rather than in some sort of functional, protocol-driven way. And it's okay to grow and mature. It's not like God's in a hurry. God is never rushed. Therefore, he wants relationship to function within all this. Not that we just do it because we think there's a problem and we're going to fix it. Because God doesn't just fix things. He wants us to come into an agreement with him for things to change. And often things change by transition out of what was old into what is new. And that takes quite a lot of time. And, I can see when I look back and thought the way I thought about things back in, 2014 or 15, or all those things, before deconstruction really started to change my view of God and everything else, then I would have also held those same perspectives. And they didn't work. As much as we thought, oh yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to legislate this and we're going to produce this law and we're going to use this law, if we're using it inappropriately, it didn't work because it had no authority. You don't have authority to use a law just because you say you do. That's the important thing. There's an area of jurisdiction that you carry authority in. We have lots of laws in the UK. They don't apply to the US. They used to, before you gained independence, but they don't anymore. So we can produce laws that don't have authority over someone else or something else. And it's important to know the boundaries. And most laws are permissive. So they empower you to do something. They don't restrict you from doing something.
I was on Facebook yesterday, and I participate in various groups like the GAN and other inclusion groups, and people put posts up, and people are either new to the inclusion mindset, or maybe they're not even there. Anyhow, someone asked a question. They said, I think it was, does God love transgender people? So of course I answered that in the affirmative.
Oh, yeah.
And I gave some reasoning. I said, look, God loves me. And I know if he can love me, he can love anybody.
Yeah.
But of course I expounded beyond that. And then I got really mischievous at the end. I was bad. I said, God even loves Donald Trump. Yeah. So I said, please forgive me. But I think that's the key. Just like on your Patreon, I don't know how many 20 some sessions when you initially kicked it off, you emphasize God's unconditional love. And, it really takes a person coming into, I think, as you have shared, my direct face to face relationship, and where God himself shows you he's not that angry, wrathful God that is, determined that people will burn forever and be fried and tormented and all of that. So that greatly has blessed me. I have a question though, Mike. I live here in the greater Indianapolis, Indiana area, just outside of Indianapolis in a suburb called Fishers. And I've done, to a degree, all I know to do to try to come into contact in the greater region with others that are more mystically minded, have more of a mystical mindset, etc., and gotten nowhere. And I've tried various ways to do that. Now, just before I came on with you this morning, when I was sitting here on the couch, it came to me. I remembered the blue light that you've talked about. So I sent out a blue light. But I'm wondering, and even if I don't know, in your records that you have, I'd be willing to simply, I could email you or similar. My phone number, I'd have no problem with you giving it. If you have people here in this greater I would love to come into fellowship with people that are like-minded. I have a very good friend of mine. He still lives in Florida, where I used to live. And we talk all the time, and he's very, very spiritually compatible. He blesses me as we share, and vice versa. But besides him, that's about the only person I'm in that kind of direct relationship with. Any thoughts on that or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think issuing a call in the spirit, and then, okay, how does that come back? That's the key, because people may pick up that call. How do they know how to contact you? I think that's always a question. I think you got to say, okay, well, God can handle how we make those contacts. So there was a group. I mean, I've got a group that meets tonight actually in the UK, or sort of Europe in general. And there's a number of people there who asked exactly that question. And it's like, well, where can we meet with anyone physically in the area? I think they sort of live in the Wales English border area or something. And I sort of said, well, okay, put out a call, send out a frequency. And now actually, I think 5 or 6 of them are actually physically connected, got to get together, meet regularly in that way. So it can work. And they were all the same thing. Oh, is there anyone out there else who connects this way? And now I don't personally know where people are from within the Engaging God program or within Patreon, because you have to go through and look at every individual person to find out where their address is, or if they even put their address in. So I don't have that information. There could be people that are from that area. I would suggest putting a message on the Patreon forum or the Engaging God forum and just saying, hey, I'm from this area. Is anyone else out there who wants to connect? That's one way of doing it. Another way would be to do that on some of the videos that we put out. If you put a comment in, hey, anyone out there from this area, I'd love to connect with anyone, again, do it, put out a Facebook post. So there are physical ways you can do it as well as just doing it in the spirit. But I would say doing it in the spirit comes first, and then those are ways that actually that frequency can connect with people in a practical way. But I don't have a database, and certainly, you know, we've got, I don't know, 20,000 Facebook followers or whatever, and sort of YouTube people, I don't know who they are, you know, in the sense of, you know, in terms of address. And I'm not sure that's something I can say which country they're in, but I don't think I can say where they live within the country. So I don't have that specific information. But definitely, you know, again, you know, the Father can give you insight into doing it. You know, you've got a Facebook presence, you've got a GAN presence. Again, you know, I would, you know, put out something on those networks and just ask, is there anyone in this location that would be wanting to connect, you know, and see what comes back. You know, the same would be, you know, on a Don Keathley post or something, post something. Hey, I'm really interested in this, or in the forums you're in, you know, in those groups, just ask, you know, is there anyone in this area that would like to connect up physically or connect up online, you know, and, you know, initially start a conversation. But I know it's not easy when, you know, we can't sort of connect up physically with people. I mean, obviously I'm in totally the opposite situation in that I'm obviously connecting with so many people, in these sorts of forums, you know, but it's never easy, you know. And what I have discovered is that generally God is at work with people more than we think, but a lot of them are quiet and silent because they don't want to get trolled online or abused by those who are still operating in the church system and other systems, which can happen. You know, I had to deal with quite a lot of that initially when we first started posting things about challenging views of God and, you know, the evangelical perspective. You know, there were a number of people who really started to try and change my thinking or challenge my thinking or get me to change my perspectives, and, you know, made accusations to me, which quite often I would totally accept. Yeah, I am moving away from your orthodoxy, just going back to the original orthodoxy that Jesus promoted, you know. So in the end, what I didn't do was obviously take offense or try to argue with them in a sense. You know, initially there were a few discussions I had and realized it didn't get anywhere because they're just not on the same page. But so a lot of people are out there, but they're keeping their head down. You know, because particularly in the US, because there is such a strong religious spirit operating that attacks people and tries to undermine people who have any opposing views, whether it's eschatological or, you know, spiritual, whatever the views, whatever we are, inclusivism, grace, all these things. Yeah, how much stuff was greasy grace and all that stuff when sort of the people started first talking about the limitless grace of God, and they were disparaged and accused and, you know, all sorts of nasty things put out there. So a lot of people, I think, keep quiet and they just get on with it, because, you know, they are, you know, don't want that type of exposure, because it's hard, you know. And, you know, I remember, you know, God prepared me to be able to handle criticism and negativity, you know, without taking offense, you know, and being able to manage it in hopefully the right way. But there were a number of people I had to block because they just weren't respectful and they weren't respecting the boundaries that we set on our material and thing. So in the end, I just say, look, you know, I'm going to have to block you because you're not actually following the guidelines we've put out. You know, but there have only been a few, not that many. And I'm sure there's lots of people out there who would oppose some of the beliefs I have or some of the things we've posted, but generally I don't see the negative stuff. And I don't want those people to see our stuff either, really. I don't want to offend people if they're not ready to pursue something more open. So yeah, I would encourage you to stay positive on it. Send out the blue lights, but also look at what are the practical things I can do to see where those connections could be made, and just see how God might bring about those connections. Because there's a lot more ways of doing it than when I started, years ago. It was like, I don't know anybody. I wouldn't have known how to connect to anyone. But God wanted to connect people to me, so they did. People actually connected to me, because when I sent out the blue light and other things like that, people found ways of connecting. I mean, the first person actually who connected, one of the first person who connected, contacted me and said, when we first started putting out the blog posts, hey, I've got questions I'd like to ask, and I think there's a few other people who might like to do a so. Well, can I create a forum for you? So I didn't even know what a forum was, but so I said, well, yeah. I said, well, he said, well, I'll give you the admin. You can look after it once I've created it. He started this forum. He said, what do you like it to be called? I said, oh, Preparing for Destiny. Let's call it that. And yeah, within a short period of time, there weren't many people, but there were 10, 12, 15 people who regularly posted things on the forum, asking questions, opening the door for me to give answers and connect. And then from there, when God said, oh, I want you to connect with people online in a physical way rather than just answering questions, I used that as the base for starting, because I just posted to them, hey, I'm looking to do an online mentoring session or just an online get together. Who will be interested in that? And I think 4 people said yes. And that's where I started. And then once we started posting YouTube videos, more and more people started to then say, well, how can we connect? How could I get mentoring? How could I join these forums, type of thing. And then it spiraled from there, So God said, I want you to do it. I had no idea how to do it. So I said, well, I'm willing. Let's see how it can happen. And God maybe engineered it for it to happen over a period of time. And then, again, it just happened lots of different occasions. And then people contact me saying, oh, you came up on my stream, or you came up on my YouTube thing as a suggestion. I looked at it. It's like, wow, it's amazing, and then those connections get made. So if you've got an online presence, obviously it's easier to make those connections, but we can use all the forums available that other people have got so that we can make the connections for like-minded people who are looking in the same areas. Because if you're on Justin's Patreon group, there'll be an opportunity of posting things on that to say, hey, anyone physically near this location who'd like to get together.
Done that.
If they don't come back, then you either got to say, well, there's none there, or they don't want to, and there's nothing much you can do about that. But America's a big country and very spread out, and therefore, if you think, well, okay, there might be, let's say, optimistically, let's say there's 100,000 people in the US who are operating or looking in this area, 100,000 spread over the size of the US they will just be dotted around, and usually they are probably more in the concentrated areas of population generally. So there's probably more in California and other places than there are in a rural area or a sort of wider, of a big state, or a state that's mainly farmland, or, that type of thing. So, I'm not saying it's easy to make these connections. Someone in previous call was asking, do you know anyone in this area of Australia? And I'm like, no, I've never been to Australia in a ministry setting, so I never made the connections. Although I have had some calls with people, and there are a number of people in Australia that are part of the program. Whether they live in his city is another matter. But I did suggest, hey, Justin's been over there doing quite a number of things in the past. I'm sure his team will probably have points of connection if they're in your city. Email them and ask them, if there's a point of connection, but there still aren't that many physical groups who meet together on a larger scale. There's one in California that I am going out to in the end of April, beginning of the May for a few days to meet with them. They've got a physical group that meets there. I know there was one who used to meet in the Atlanta area, Toronto, but not what you could say, hey, you've got a network of churches who are meeting all over the US who meet in this way. Same as the UK. People ask me the same question in the UK. Is there anyone physical I can connect to? And I'm like, well, all I can do is point you to some people, but I don't know what they're doing. You've got Company of Burning Hearts, you have the Glory Company. So there's a few groups, but not groups in every area of the country or whatever. Not that I know of anyway. So we're still in the early days of that, I think.
That's good advice, Mike. I just want to add a follow-up question to what Dan articulated. I guess I didn't hear about the blue light. Can you define what that is, who it is, what it is, how you engage it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. This goes back to probably 2013 initially.
Uh-huh.
God spoke to me and he said, I want you to send out a blue light call. So my initial reaction was, okay, no idea how to do that though. So I was sitting in heaven on my throne and I said, I issue a blue light call. That was it. I didn't know anything more to do than that, simply to do that. So I did it. And then I went back to God and said, well, what's it for? And he said, well, and he showed me this picture of arcing connections over the world, where people would be connecting and there would be intersections of connection. And therefore, this blue light would call those people and they would start to connect. So, oh, okay, great. And didn't really think much more about it. And then a couple of weeks later, I was in a physical meeting with some local church ministers in my area at the time. And one of them, who I was, fairly friendly with, sort of said to me afterwards, do you know anything about a blue light? And I said, well, maybe. What is it? And he said, well, every time I've been engaging and praying and whatever over the last couple of weeks, these blue lights have been coming around me and dancing around me. So I said, well, have you got any time after the meeting? So we connected up, and I said, well, yeah, I issued this blue light call for people who would come together and make connections around the world and connect governmentally, particularly. To which we then started meeting together, to do that sort of thing. So I didn't go into any more details about what because I didn't do anything. I just said it. I released it. But I had testimonies from lots and lots of people over the years who blue lights have come into their rooms, or they've had dreams with blue lights in them, balls of blue light. One lady in New Zealand who blue lights were following her car every night. And so there's lots of testimonies that people have come back with, and subsequently God's asked me to release that again, and it's still out there. It doesn't stop.
And I think I told you this before, but I saw when I first came to see you out at Barnstable, I saw at least once, I think it was twice, a blue light in the room. It was like a ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness.
That's sort of the gist of it.
Yeah.
Well, whatever you do in the spirit doesn't just stop unless God's got a time limit on something for a time period, it carries on in the spiritual realm. So people can still connect with and resonate with that blue light call even now. And, you know, I've issued it a number of times since for whatever specific reasons God said at the time. And, you know, I believe that God is wanting to connect people around the world, and but with a way of arcing together, of connecting together, of forming connections that will be significant in what God's doing. And then you sort of later on, you connect to other people. Like when I was connected to Nancy Cohen, she was like, she had this sort of picture of the blue grid around the globe and things like that. Which so yeah, this is just a different way of looking at the same thing in effect. That you realize, you know, but God's probably been doing this with lots of people for a long time.
I was wanting to ask you, Mike,
Yeah.
you know, when I'm talking about the shift and you know, these things that are that God's wanting to move us into, you know, Lindy's death has really been challenging for me. And when I first found out about it, I've never met her, but I've had I was on a call with her, and but I did, you know, pray much for her and agreed with Father in the work that she was doing in her own personal life of healing and restoration. And, you know, it really affected me, you know, when I heard the news. And when I was before Father, I heard the word disheartened. And he was showing me that I was disheartened and that I've had to work through that process. But I was wondering if you could just share, you know, kind of like, okay, I want to say it, where do we go from here? But I know ultimately that Father's in control, and he will, you know, recover all things, and that Lindy now is just in another dimension, that she will still, you know, as part of the cloud of witnesses, if there's any interaction, which I have had interaction with her because I have a health mountain that Father's wanting me to govern and rule from. And I felt her come around it, and I was surprised at first, and it's thought, well, you know, that's what she represented on the earth. That's what she was doing, what she was about, part of her life.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it is difficult when the people that you honor and the people that you really look to be forerunners in these things don't end up fulfilling everything that they believed or were going for. And you know, you just read Hebrews 11 and you've got a whole list of people there who it clearly says, you know, they didn't see the fulfillment, but they died in faith. And she died in faith, and you know, and I've engaged her in the cloud of witnesses, and she's all good. So she said everything's good, all good, you know. So she's carrying on that ministry there, and you know, I'm sure that will be effective. It's how we deal with it is the issue. And I don't have the answers, and I don't think anyone has, to why these things happen. You know, I've had a number of people who were close to me, who were friends or connections, who have died. You know, some of them, 3 or 4 of them, were in a week, you know, at one point. And I was like, whoa, this is, you know, what's going on? And if what I felt from the Father was, it's okay. You don't need to know, you know, as much as I'd like to know why and what's going on. You don't know what's going on with someone at that point. Now, I obviously know the details because I was her friend, and you know, we go back 15 years and we did a lot together, stuff with Justin and others that we did together, and therefore, you know, I have a personal relationship with her. And you know, we had a number of discussions around health and around her view of what she was going through and why she was going through it, and how, you know, this was going to be used to help other people, and God will bring good out of everything. You know, that's always his intention, but I don't believe God brought that on her or wanted her to have it. So we sort of had slightly different opinions over the whole issue, but we were, friends and in relationship, and we could talk openly about some of those things, and that was fine. And you don't always have to be in agreement. She has to deal with her own life and whatever, and I would have probably liked her to be a little bit more, I guess, not as passive in accepting maybe what was happening or what had happened. But we have different views of that, and we have talked about it and different things. So I don't know exactly why and why then. I know she has been responsible for bringing people a long way on the whole issue of immortality, and I believe there may be a book coming out that was written not recently, which hopefully will get published, to which that again may well help more people come through. Now you could say, well, the greatest thing would be that she didn't die, and that's the testimony, but I don't know everything about the situation or what was going on at the end and what God's purposes were within all of it, then and there. So all I can say is we have to manage our own heart expectations, and not to allow disappointment to make our hearts sick so that it affects our personal belief in it all. So from my perspective, I've had friends, a number of friends who've died who believed in immortality, or certainly believed in health and wholeness and other areas, who have died. And what it's not done is affected my view of God being a good God, and my view that God will bring good out of everything. But I don't believe God brings everything. I don't think God, some people are God's sovereignty, who believe, well, God is sovereign. Everything that happens must be God because it happened and God is sovereign. Well, if you go down that route, then you're going to see God's responsible for everything bad in the world. And he's not. What's bad in the world is our responsibility, because we have created that and done that from our lack of being in relationship with God and outworking God's love. So, so I don't see that God is sovereign in that sort of way that some people teach it, that it becomes almost fatalistic, that everything that's happened in the world must be God because God's sovereign. It wouldn't happen without him, and I don't believe that at all, because I don't believe God functions that way. And God is transcendent, and God's immanent, and God works in the immanency of them every moment of our lives without controlling it or orchestrating it. Does he orchestrate the general things in my life as I've surrendered to him? Yes, but he doesn't control me. I can see his hand at work in my life, and I can see him being like the orchestra playing the song of my destiny, but I've had to dance with the tune, if you like, and come into alignment and come into the rhythm and come into the beat of the tune that he was orchestrating. And if I chose not to, I could. And there were times where he was orchestrating the tune and I was resistant to dancing that tune, because I might have not seen myself as a very good dancer, if you like, or not very good at that area that he was looking to orchestrate in my life, and sort of couldn't see myself doing that type of thing. But I've come to realize that the way I look at myself is not the way he looks at me. And so when I'm willing to participate, even if I think I can't do that, that's not me, but I'm picking up the rhythm, or I'm picking up the beat or the sound, and I'm sort of drawn towards it. Whenever I participate and go throw myself into it, I end up benefiting from it and enjoying it and rejoicing over it. And it's like those sorts of things. And I have a view of myself that says there are certain things I'm not very good at. And therefore, if I'm not very good at them, I've got a choice. I either will desire to be better at them, so I might put in some effort to get better at them. But if I don't really see myself doing it, most of the time I'm like, nah, can't be bothered with that. But then I can miss out. So when we were on holiday in South America and down on Antarctica, on the cruise, there were Argentine tango lessons. Okay. Now, that did not enthrall me, and I didn't think, oh, I don't do that. But Debbie decided she'd like to do Argentine tango lessons, so she went to the thing, and I thought, well, I'll just follow behind and just watch what goes on, where she can't see me, and I'll video it and have a laugh, because that was just a bit of fun. But I went, and she was there, and there weren't enough men, as is usual in those type of things, because men feel a bit like spare parts, or we can't do this, so there weren't enough men there. So she was there leading this other woman in this dance. So I took a picture of her on the first lesson. And then the second time I said, oh, I'll come down and watch you doing it. And the woman didn't turn up. So she said, well, would you dance with me? So I'm like, oh, I don't want to. But I thought, well, I know she really wants to, so I'll give it a go. So I gave it a go. And it was like, okay, I've got to think about steps. I've got to think about beat. I can't think about both of them at the same time. It's like, I'm never going to do this. But I persevered. And then it was really good, because it was like the guy who was orchestrating it, he said, you've got to follow the leader. So I'm like, so if I just lead, she's got to follow me. So even if I get it wrong, she's got to follow me. So it'll look okay. Even if we're not doing it perfect, we'll be at least in sync. Well, that was not the easiest thing for her to do, because she wanted me to do it right so she could follow me in the right way of doing it. So I said to the guy, well, does she have to follow me only when I get it right? Oh, no, she has to follow you everything you do. So I'm like, oh, yippee, this is great, because now I can just enjoy myself. And if I get it wrong, it doesn't really matter, because she's got to follow anyway. So actually, in the end, I started to enjoy it, because I was not under pressure to have to get everything perfect. Because if she followed me, we would be doing steps, even if they're in the wrong order. We'd still be doing steps. So I learned to enjoy it. And actually by the end of the 6 lessons, we could do all of the steps and we could do the dance. It may not have been perfect. And then when it came to freestyling, I was still thinking about counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because we did an 8 thing, and then we did a 6 thing, and then we did a 4 thing and a 3 thing, and then we had to put them all together. But I went for it. So I saw myself as a non-dancer. So that meant I didn't want to dance, because I saw myself that way. And there are lots of times in my life that I did not see myself the way God saw me. And therefore I was hesitant to actually dance to the rhythm of the song that he had formed for me, the song of my life. And so I was resistant to it, because I didn't see myself that way. But he did. And therefore I learned to trust in his view of me. Therefore, if he wanted me to do something or lead me in a direction, I learned to trust that he knows more about me than I do. And if I'm not in agreement with him, I'm the one who's going to miss out on that. So I started to step out and take some risks. Even though I was hesitant, I trusted him. And I think, that's what God would want for all of us, to flow with the orchestration of the dance. Now, I don't believe God orchestrates us in sovereignty, that we have to do everything perfectly in alignment with his perfect will and feel a failure because we get it wrong all the time. He wants a trier. He wants someone who's willing to have a go. And after you keep having a go, guess what? You get better at it. So every night when we went down to the lessons, or the daytime we went to the lessons, each time I was getting more confident with the steps because I memorized the steps. And now I wasn't having to think so much about the steps. I could then think about the rhythm and sort of doing it to the music, which was like, very foreign to start with. And then in the evenings, we would what was called milongas, which were practice sessions where they just played the music and the guy was there giving us a few tips and whatever, but we just sort of got on with it, and the more we did it, the more confident I got. And I found that with God all the way along the line, God would sort of be drawing me into something that I would feel completely out of my depth over. But because I trusted him, I sort of eventually went for it and then realized the more I did it, the better I got at it. And then I realized, oh, I am a dancer. I may not ever be like him or her, or I won't go on Strictly Come Dancing, that's for sure. But, or Dancing with the Stars in your thing, but actually, we could dance. And if the music played, we would have some fun doing it. So I think God wants us to discover just the flow. And like going back to Lindy flowed. I loved how she facilitated things. So whenever we did things together, I was like, oh, Lindy's here. It's like I can just merge into the background and let her get on with it because she's great at it. Because I knew my strengths, I knew her strengths. So, there were things that she didn't like doing or didn't feel, and she would call me in to do those things because she knew that's something I could do. I was better at explaining the technical things of how to do certain things and how to do it. She would just be, oh, just do it. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't help me. You might be able to do it. What about me? I can't do it. Well, just do it. Well, no, I can't. If I could, I would do it. So for me, I like to know how to do it. So I would, oh, how do I do this? How do I learn how to do this? And I would learn how to do it and then be able to explain to others who were like me, who couldn't just do it and needed a little bit more support or help in doing it. But when it came to facilitating things, Lindy was wonderful. She's done some amazing activations that I've been in and really got totally immersed in, and life-changing things that she did. And she was great at that sort of thing. So she was great at helping people enter into the path and the journey. And I'll miss her. And, I honor her for everything that she did and all that she accomplished, and the sort of the amazing resource that she was, which was awesome. And I really appreciate everything that she did and the battle she fought and the time that because she was given 2 weeks to live, and years later, which she did all those years having been given 2 years to live. So she was not going to give up, but I believe God will still bring good out of everything, and he will bring good out of her now being part of the cloud of witnesses. And hopefully he'll bring good out of the sessions that she has done, and people can still listen to them and everything else, and not get disappointed, that it didn't turn out perfectly. Because I know most things don't turn out perfectly, and therefore I don't want to go around being disappointed with how other people didn't fulfill what they said they were going to do or whatever, because I'm only responsible for me, so I don't want to be disappointed with me. So I try and make sure that I do everything that God's wanting me to do. And so, and ultimately, it's for other people to judge that, and I don't make that sort of judgment on Lindy or anything else. She ran the race and she did some amazing things, and I rejoice and celebrate in what she did do rather than what she didn't do. you know.
She really was such a sweetie. I have to just say that. She was
Well,
amazing, and I was really sad too. It was just so interesting when I woke up, I think it was the Sunday after she passed. It was like 4 in the morning, and I'm thinking, Lindy, Lindy, and kind of wondering how she's doing, because so many times I'd kind of go to her website to try to find out what was going on with her. And beyond her initial announcement, I didn't find anything. So I woke up it was exactly 1 week after she had passed away on a Sunday morning. And I got to her website, and somehow I stumbled upon the announcement that had been posted 3 hours earlier. I felt so sad to hear that news. It was just like, oh, how really sad, just such a loss for us. I know she's celebrating and dancing in heaven with Jesus and all of that, but there's just that, oh, we miss her, this on this side. We just really do miss
absolutely.
her.
Yeah, it definitely it's that way. But I I focus on the celebrating her life and what she did and all that she accomplished, and the sadness of her not being here to continue that. I know she's cheering us on, and I know she is orchestrating whatever she's doing in that realm, and I'm sure she's organizing stuff up there, that's for sure, because that's who she was, and I'm sure God's got her in a place where he's using that there as well as for here, but I know we'll benefit from it here, so I remain positive. And although emotionally there was sad and a sense of grief and loss, I also honor her life and all the amazing things she did, and trust that God will continue to outwork those things even if she isn't here, because his purposes are still ongoing, and he wants more and more people to come into the reality of who he is and in their true identity as immortal sons of God. But I know people who live with that belief system are much happier than those people who are focusing on the negative all the time and focusing on what they don't have. Because I'm focusing on being immortal. Great. Well, that means I don't focus on the fact of not dying. I focus on the fact of living in abundance, in the overflow. So for me, immortality has nothing to do with death whatsoever. And it doesn't impinge on my thinking about immortality at all. It used to, but now it doesn't, because I realize immortality is about the abundant life that Jesus promised us to live. Nothing to do with death, nothing to do with dying or not dying. It is living. So he promised that we would live in abundance and overflow. So that is what I focus on. And that is what I believe God is bringing people into, that we are to live an abundant life, limitless energy, filled with living water flowing from our innermost being and flowing out, that we're a source of life to creation. Because that is who God created us to be. That's why creation is waiting, longing for the revealing of the sons of God in our true identity and nature, because we are actually flowing with life, bringing life wherever we go. And that's what I focus on when I think about immortality and everything else. I don't focus on the negative. And yet we could look and say, well, there's 2,000 years of history or whatever of people dying, even if they're Christians. And I say, yep, that is true. But that doesn't affect what I believe that Jesus promised. We may have not yet fully embraced the things that he promised, but that doesn't mean he didn't promise them. So I'm going to focus on what he did promise, and he promised that he came to give us life in abundance. And that, if we keep drinking from the right source, which is him, then we'll have rivers of living water flowing, and we'll have limitless energy, and we will live in health and wholeness and have all that we need to fulfill all he called us to do. And that is, for me, the positive place that I live. And if people die in the midst of that, then I rejoice in their life, celebrate that, and sad for the fact that they've died, but it doesn't change what my outlook is on life or whatever. Just because someone didn't fulfill and receive all the promises of God in total doesn't mean that God didn't promise it. So I'm focusing on the Father, on his promises, on Jesus and what Jesus said. And that is where I center, and I don't let anything else actually affect that, because that is the truth. There may be facts that seem to contradict the truth, but those facts are changing. So I believe less and less people will die, ultimately, when they embrace living in an immortal state. And actually, even though Lindy died, she lived in hope. She lived in joy and peace. She didn't live in anxiety or worry or fear, because she believed in immortality. Therefore, fear had no place within immortality. And that is the key. People who live and believe in immortality don't live in fear. And even if they do die, they still had a better life for living with immortality than not. Living in fear and worry and anxiety, that's no way to live. That's not abundance. So even though people might die, their life is still better than those who live in fear and anxiety and worry over death. Because it says in Hebrews that it's through fear of death that people live in bondage their whole lives. I don't live in fear of death. Lindy didn't live in fear of death. She lived focused on the abundance of life, and she laughed her way through it. You know, and she did have a really good laugh. You know, so I rejoice in her life and celebrate her and honor her for all that she's done. And I believe that God will take it further, so more and more will fully embrace the promises that he has given in that. So. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.